Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan. I'm Sally Jensen. Like many countries around the world, Taiwan's tourism industry was hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. But the country's borders reopened last year and visitor numbers still haven't really picked up again. They're only half that of pre-pandemic levels. To boost visitor numbers, Taiwan is injecting a lot of money and even upgrading the government's official tourism department. But is this just about funding, or is there more at stake here? To discuss this, I'm joined by Ian Rowen. Ian is a geographer of tourism and a professor at National Taiwan Normal University. He's also the author of the book One China, Many Taiwans, The Geopolitics of Cross-Strait Tourism. Ian, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
So let's zoom in on what Taiwan has to offer. What do you think are the country's biggest selling points for visiting tourists?
Sure. Taiwan has an incredibly dense, high concentration of beaches, mountains, hot springs, mountain biking trails, outdoor offerings, temples, night markets, delicious food, all in a very small and easily accessed area with really world-class infrastructure. Taiwan's high-speed rail is excellent. Taiwan's subway systems in Taipei, now Taichung and Kaohsiung are also high-quality mass transit systems. There's incredible safety here. As you know, you can walk almost anywhere, apart from the pedestrian hell that is much of Taiwan's urban spaces when it comes to general security, a very low incidence of violent crime and so on. It's an incredibly safe place to visit. People are generally welcoming. Government's generally responsive. It's got a lot to offer. That said, compared to many destinations in the region, particularly comparing to Thailand, Bali, or even Japan, its tourism appeal could be better communicated both within and also beyond Taiwan.
You mentioned tourists perhaps choosing to go to Japan and Korea or elsewhere in Southeast Asia. What do you think, if somebody is looking to buy a plane ticket to go somewhere in Asia, what would make them choose Taiwan over those other places?
I think for people who've been to those other places, Taiwan might appeal as somewhere new. For people who read too much news and are concerned about the imminent outbreak of World War III, it may be an adventure tourism destination, given the ridiculous kind of presentation of Taiwan as the most dangerous place in the world that we see, for example, in magazines like The Economist. But I think for more clear-headed people, those who want to experience again, wonderful outdoor offerings, world-class museums, if one considers the National Palace Museum's incredible collection of Chinese antiquities, and other sorts of museums that have popped up around Taiwan, good food, and all really quite easily accessed, as well as really world-class hot springs, many that compare to the best of Japan. I think there's a whole lot to offer here.
There are also a lot of tourism campaigns that we've been seeing popping up all the time. A recent example would be amusement parks looking for foreign ambassadors, including one for Little Ding Dong Science Theme Park. Who exactly are these campaigns targeting?
It's a really good question, and I would love to ask the Tourism Bureau myself who they think they're targeting by marketing amusement parks by way of, frankly, fairly random foreign, usually white influencers. I'm really not sure. And I think these kinds of very short-term campaigns are symptomatic of a general lack of consistency and clarity in Taiwan's long-term tourism promotional campaigns. Every year we see some new kind of gimmick, frankly. And given that there have been a few years to really rethink Taiwan's tourism strategy from a more comprehensive and long-term perspective, given the pandemic break, I find it startling and frankly a little bit saddening to see frankly, kind of lame stunts aimed at random amusement parks that very few people are likely to visit.
Since we're getting into some of the problems in Taiwan's tourism strategy, let's zoom out to take a look at the bigger picture. Taiwan's tourism sector is actually struggling from a tourism deficit. Our reporter John Van Trieste has the latest story. Let's take a look.
Downtown Taipei is busy with tourists, but not nearly as busy as it used to be. The local tourism industry has seen sluggish recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. From January to July, the number of visitors was just around half the number of local tourists heading abroad. One of the main problems is that the tourism industry relies heavily on visitors from just a few nearby countries. But at the moment, these neighbors are staying away. Japan's weak yen and Taiwan's rising prices mean Japanese tourists prefer to stay home. Meanwhile, tourist links with China have yet to be restarted after they were cut off during the pandemic. But even once all this passes, some say the industry will still have another problem to overcome. Visitors tend to stick to a handful of heavily promoted attractions. Once they've checked these off the list, they go home and don't come back. Just around 20 to 30% of overseas tourists are repeat visitors.
总不能我们在对外行销总是101故宫阿里山日月潭台湾的小吃夜市这样的一个宣传效果，其实它是适用于第一次想要来台湾的。
Those in tourism say the local industry has to stop just pointing people towards these usual tourist trails and offer something different. Otherwise, overcoming the tourist deficit may prove to be a difficult task.
So, Ian, we just saw how Taiwan is struggling to catch up on tourism numbers from pre-pandemic levels, and now the government's official tourism department has been freshly upgraded. Can you tell us the purpose of this upgrade, and what is the strategy here?
Tourism in Taiwan in the 2000s was aimed at Japanese, Southeast Asian, North American, and somewhat European travelers. But starting in 2008 to 2016, under a very China-centric policy led by then President Ma Ying-jeou, the tourism industry went pretty much all in on Chinese tourists. They saw millions of potential tourists coming in. It was very easy to channel their visits, their spending into very particular circuits of hotels, theme parks, and largely shopping destinations that tourists frankly found a little bit distasteful. And I know this because I joined them for a number of these tours. Now, since then, of course, there was a new president. China and Taiwan's relationship changed rather dramatically, and Chinese tourism fell off a cliff due to factors somewhat beyond Taiwan's control. The breach was filled in by marketing instead towards Southeast Asian tourists, some South Asian, and other sorts of tourists, which actually kept the number of tourism arrivals actually growing, even if it's hard to track how much they spent. Following the pandemic, of course, there were no one coming into Taiwan as a recreational tourist. And even now in 2023, I still get questions from friends and family about whether or not Taiwan has reopened. Taiwan being one of the very last destinations in the world to reopen for travelers for leisure with or without a quarantine. So Taiwan is making up now, I think, somewhat belatedly, despite having, even as early as 2020, given Taiwan's incredibly successful pandemic management, it's really world-class public health management. And at that time, head of the Tourism Bureau or Minister of Transportation and Communication, Lin Jialong, saying things like, well, Taiwan has got the best pandemic management in the world. It should be the earliest country to reopen and get back to normal tourism. Of course, we've seen that's absolutely not the case.
So do you think increasing government funding in the sector and increasing international PR is enough, though? Do you feel that Taiwan needs to develop more tourist attractions?
I think increasing promotional campaigns to North America, to Europe, to Southeast Asia, and other sending regions is going to help. Not just increasing budgets, but longer planning, more comprehensive planning involving better designers, frankly. A lot of the contractors used, be they by local or even the national government, often are unfortunate. They don't reflect the best that Taiwan has to offer. I think another thing beyond marketing is seeing what is already developing organically within Taiwan. For example, the East Coast has sprouted a thriving surf culture in places like Taidong and Dulan, and in Yilan and Tochang. And these are quite exciting. These are not outgrowths of any sort of government campaign. These are things that Taiwanese locals, as well as international visitors and residents, have kind of developed together for their own enjoyment, but then could be better marketed as tourism destination attractions. Often local governments actually will go arrest people for using the beach or fine them for surfing on beaches without lifeguards, when frankly most surfers know much better what they're doing than most other kinds of beach users. So I think we've seen this kind of pattern, be it with surfing, be it with mountain biking, be it with river tracing, where a government gets concerned about a use of an environment it itself doesn't understand very well. It clamps down rather than recognizing that maybe it should work with the enthusiasts to develop these as potential, dare I say, products that could then be promoted to reflect well on Taiwan and also bring in new arrivals and new revenues.
So Taiwan is focusing heavily on attracting more international tourists, but as we just saw from John's report, only a small handful of them, about 20 to 30%, actually visit Taiwan more than once. So what's the intention here? Is it for them just to visit once, or does Taiwan want more repeat visits?
Well, tourism, it brings money into any sort of market. Of course, Taiwan would like to have more and more tourists spending more on hotels, on food, on shopping, and the like. Also, for a contested state like Taiwan, tourists who come to Taiwan and go away with a positive impression are much more likely to support it, to share their good impression of Taiwan, to promote goodwill on behalf of Taiwan and Taiwanese people and Taiwan residents when they go back home. So this one could call a form of soft power that Taiwan, I think, more than most countries, needs to demonstrate a commitment to.
And at the same time, Taiwan is trying to attract more foreign talent. Is there a possibility to turn repeat visitors into longer term residents? Is that the goal here?
As far as I know, I don't think there is much cross-departmental work between agencies that work both on attracting foreign talent and tourism. I don't know of a coordinated campaign to do that. That having been said, perhaps for you, as for me, tourism was our first exposure to Taiwan. It led us to wanting to come to move here, to work here, to reside here, and those things come hand in hand. And many of the same factors that inhibit both tourism and immigration are shared. So. Another thing, perhaps keeping people from coming in droves or returning is, well, frankly, in places like Taipei, English is quite available on bus signs, on subway signs, but elsewhere in Taiwan, often in some of its most beautiful areas, it may be confusing for tourists to get around if they don't read Chinese. Other kinds of issues for both would be limited forms of online payments or electronic payments, or acceptability of credit cards, or also the general difficulty and frankly baffling intransigence of certain aspects of Taiwan's banking. I think plague both Taiwan residents, immigrants, as well as tourists. So these are all things that, as Taiwan thinks about how to become even more foreign friendly, beyond the rhetoric of Taiwan being a welcoming and tolerant place, but actually making that part of the institutional fabric of Taiwanese society and political economy are things that both tourism and immigration officials really should think about together.
And based on your own observation, what are the odds that numbers of tourists actually return to pre-pandemic levels?
I suspect it's quite likely that will happen, especially if hotel prices go down, if with flight ticket levels remain level, they actually continue to rise, which may be, again, factors beyond Taiwan's control due to fuel costs and the like. I think what is hardest to predict, of course, will be the potential return of Chinese tourists who received really the most fanfare and got the most press, both good and bad, given widely circulated reports of poor behavior and destination impacts, environmental impacts, impacts on site pleasantness and the like, due to crowding and other kinds of poor management. I think it's hard to predict their return, and it's entirely dependent on the outcome of the election, and following that, the interaction between Chinese and Taiwanese authorities, which is extremely hard to predict.
Thanks so much. We'll end it there. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. You can find more from TaiwanPlus by following us on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.